Hello again, my name is Brother Nathan Linton, and welcome to Superior Disciple. So as you know, in my past several videos, I've been going through the life of St. Francis. In our last video, we looked at St. Francis and his brothers traveling from Assisi down to Rome in order to get their way of life approved by Pope Innocent III, to make their lives officially a part of the Church and to be recognized by the Church. So with that, we've really finished our overview of the early life of St. Francis of Assisi. We've looked at his childhood, we've looked at his conversion, and we've looked at the initial establishment of the order. So now things are going to be a little bit different. I mean, there's so many different things that we can talk about, so many different stories that we can reflect upon from the life of St. Francis of Assisi. And so today I want to look at the discernment of St. Francis. Now that might seem a little bit strange to start talking about discernment after Francis has already entered into religious life and established this community. But I think it makes sense once you start looking at the context in his life. For us, we talk about discernment generally as vocational discernment. Should I in my life, follow Christ, give my life to Christ as a husband, as and a father, or as a priest, or as a religious, or as someone consecrated, as someone set aside to serve the Church through a single life, right? We kind of talk about those as the four main callings, right? Married life, consecrated single life, religious life, and priesthood, or some combination of the two, right? Like you can be a religious and a priest, or you can be like married and a deacon like my father. So you can see that we really generally, when we talk about discernment, we talk about vocational discernment. We talk about which of these paths is God calling me down? Which of these paths am I going to best serve God in? And Francis had already answered that question, right? We've looked at him as he's gone through this process, not only of conversion, but of opening his heart to the call of Christ, so that when he hears the gospel message, when he hears Jesus telling his disciples to go out into the world without a second tunic, without a purse or a walking stick or sandals for their feet, he immediately hears and he understands, this is what my heart desires. This is what God is calling me to do, to follow him, to embrace, as he would lovingly refer to her, to embrace Lady Poverty, to follow in the footsteps of Jesus and the apostles. But that wasn't the end of St. Francis's discernment, and nor is it the end of ours. Our discernment doesn't end when we enter into our vocation, when we decide, yes, I love this woman, and now I'm going to be engaged to her, and I'm going to get married, and this is going to be how I find satisfaction myself through this, giving myself entirely to God through my engagement to this person, or through my priestly ministry, or through my religious life as a religious brother or sister, or through my work as a consecrated single person in the Church. It's a beautiful moment, but that's not the end. That's the beginning of our life with Christ. That when we enter, when I entered into religious life, right? When I became a Capuchin, even before vows, when I entered into postulancy, that marked not the completion of my religious life, but only the beginning. You're not expected to be a perfect religious, nor should you be expected to be a perfect spouse on the first day of your engagement, of your postulancy, of your marriage, right? This is only the beginning, and we constantly have to be open to hear what God is calling us to in our day-to-day life. Well, for Francis, it was still a pretty big question. He and his brothers returned to the Spoleto Valley, and Francis began to think and began to worry himself. What is it I'm supposed to actually be doing? Yes, I know with all my heart that I'm supposed to be following the example of Christ, and I know I'm supposed to be living poorly and simply, but should I devote myself entirely to prayer as a hermit? Or should I occasionally go out and preach? This was his personal struggle. He wasn't sure what to do, because he had a great love for Christ and a great love for prayer and for silence and solitude, but he also was good at preaching and he enjoyed doing it. He didn't know what to do. Now, there are a lot of early sources that kind of just touch on this moment where Francis didn't know what to do and he prayed and he discerned this. That's great. And it's beautiful, but I actually want to look more so at the story that's told in the Little Flowers of St. Francis of Assisi. You may be familiar with this. It's a really popular text. It talks a lot about like the miracles and the stories in St. Francis's life. Franciscan historians often will kind of push it aside because it's a much, much, much later text, so they think it's a little bit more embellished and that kind of thing. But I personally really like the story as it's told in the Little Flowers, especially when it comes to this moment, because I think it really gives you a better sense of what's happening in Francis's own heart, but also kind of shows how he actually discerned. Obviously, he prayed, but that wasn't the only recourse that he took. And I think he did so wisely, right? So Francis was stuck with this decision. Should I dedicate my life to prayer, or should I also go out and, as he says, like win souls for Christ? Should I help to lead others on this path? And so what he does is he calls one of the brothers. He calls Brother Maceo, and he sends him out as a messenger. And he sends Brother Maceo first to Clare of Assisi, who he helped to enter into religious life and to found the monastery of San Damiano, and the Poor Clares, as they would eventually be called, but originally were referred to as the Poor Ladies, or the simply the monastery at San Damiano, the Sisters of San Damiano. And, excuse me. And he would send Brother Maceo to Clare to ask her this question: what do you believe that God is calling me to do? And he would also send Brother Maceo to Brother Sylvester, who was well known for being a very holy man, for being a very prayerful man. He basically lived as a hermit. And I think that's funny, because you can kind of start to see like Francis saying, yes, I know that this is a good thing to go out and preach to others and to help them in this way of life, and that I like have this gift for this, but I really want to be, devoted entirely to God. I love Jesus. I love contemplating Christ crucified. I love contemplating his poverty and his humility and his love. So I'm going to send you to these two hermits, right? He sends one to Brother Sylvester, a hermit, and to Clare, a cloistered religious sister, which that sounds like he kind of was trying to stack the deck here. But Brother Maceo goes, and he goes to Clare, and she says, well, give me time so that my sisters and I can pray on this. And then he goes to Brother Sylvester, and Brother Sylvester goes into the woods, and he spends some time in prayer and silence and solitude. And he returns and gives his message to Brother Maceo, and Brother Maceo returns to St. Clare, and Clare gives him what they've discerned, and then Brother Sylvester returns to St. Francis. St. Francis comes to Brother Maceo, embraces him, they have dinner, and then Francis gets to business. What did you hear? What did they say? And Brother Maceo tells Francis that both Brother Sylvester and Sister Clare and her sisters all felt that he was called to go out into the world and to preach. And I think this is really kind of important insight into the process of discernment, right? Discernment is ultimately, we're us trying to understand what God is calling us to. But I think Francis was really wise here, especially since he knew he was biased. He knew he wanted to go this one route, and even though he stacked the deck, God, through these holy people and through these discerning people, helped him to really understand what he was called to do, that he was not only called to a life of prayer, but also to go out into the world to preach and to help lead others along the same path, to help them to build a deep and intimate relationship with God, their Father. And so that's what I would recommend. If any of you are discerning, and hopefully all of you are, whether you're discerning your initial vocational discernment, or you're discerning that every day, what is God calling me to do, and how is God calling me to live out my life day to day in my simple actions, to not only devote yourself to prayer, but to seek the advice of people in your life, to surround yourself with people who not only know you very well, as St. Clare knew St. Francis and Brother Sylvester knew St. Francis, but are also deeply open to the message of God and who are themselves trying to discern God's call in their day-to-day life. I think that's one of the blessings of our brotherhood here as Capuchins, is that we have these brothers who we live with, who know us perhaps at times better than we know ourselves. They know our gifts, they know our faults in ways that we might not always see, and they can help us to discern how God is calling us to be in our lives, what God is calling us to do in ministry, in prayer, in our life in fraternity. It's a really beautiful thing. And I love that this question of discernment appears in the life of St. Francis after his vocational discernment, after he's already discerned, followed the gospel, embraced Lady Poverty, but to do so in a way that's contemplative and active, because it shows us that this is an ongoing process, and that through engagement in this process, God will continue to reveal himself in our life every day. My name is Brother Nathan Linton, and again, I want to thank you for joining me here at Superior Disciple. Peace and all good. God's blessings be with you.